Commander Ziktar stood in front of a large screen that showed Earth floating in space. The blue and green planet looked small and peaceful from where his ship waited in the darkness. His tall body was covered in dark scales, and his yellow eyes moved as he looked at the information his scouts had sent back. The alien commander had been conquering planets for over 200 years. His people, the Vorthans, had taken control of 47 different worlds across the galaxy. Each time was the same. They would arrive with their huge fleet, show their power, and the local people would give up without much of a fight. Earth was supposed to be just another easy win. Sub-Commander Veloth walked up beside his leader. He had 4 eyes instead of 2, and they all looked worried as he read the reports. "The humans are very simple," he said in their clicking language. "They still use old rockets to fly in space. Their weapons are basic bombs that they seem afraid to use on each other." Zektar made a sound that was like laughing. Afraid of their own weapons. How weak these creatures must be. He pointed at the screen with one of his long fingers. "Look at their planet. They have split themselves into many small groups that fight each other over land and resources. They cannot even work together on their own world." The reports showed that humans had only visited their own moon a few times. They had sent small machines to other planets in their system, but nothing more. Their fastest ships would take thousands of years to reach even the closest star. To the Vorthans, this was proof that humans were babies in terms of space travel. "How many ships should we bring?" Veloth asked. The standard attack force was usually 1,000 ships, but that was for planets with real defenses. 300 will be more than enough, Zektar decided. These humans have never seen real power. When they look up and see our fleet blocking out their sun, they will surrender immediately. We might not even need to fire our weapons. While the aliens made their plans, deep under Earth's Pacific Ocean, Dr. Jake Morrison was looking at his computer screens with growing worry. The underwater station where he worked was supposed to watch for earthquakes and study the ocean floor. But the readings he was seeing now were not natural. Jake was a smart man who had studied physics for most of his life. He knew what normal energy looked like, and this was not normal. Strange signals were coming from space, signals that no human machine was making. "Lisa, come look at this," he called to his partner. Dr. Lisa Park had once worked for NASA before joining this secret project. She was one of the few people on Earth who might understand what they were seeing. Lisa walked over and looked at Jake's screen. Her face went pale as she saw the numbers. "Those are not random signals," she said quietly. "Someone is scanning our planet. Someone with technology much better than ours." "How long have they been watching us?" Jake asked. "Based on these patterns, maybe weeks, maybe months." Lisa sat down hard in her chair. "Jake, I think we have visitors coming. And I don't think they're friendly." 3,000 miles away, in a building that most people drove past without noticing, Admiral Kate Sullivan was reading the same report. Her office looked normal from the outside, but it was actually the control center for humanity's biggest secret. For 15 years, Admiral Sullivan had been in charge of something called the Horizon Project. Most people thought it was just another military research program. The truth was much bigger and much more dangerous. The Horizon Project existed because some very smart people had figured out that Earth was not alone in the universe. More than that, they had realized that the universe was probably full of dangers. Aliens who might want to take over or destroy human civilization. So they had started preparing. "Get me Phoenix Base on the secure line," Admiral Sullivan told her assistant, Colonel Ryan Torres. Phoenix Base was built inside a large asteroid that floated in space between Earth and Mars. To anyone looking from the outside, it looked like just another piece of space rock. Inside, it was humanity's most advanced research center. Dr. Morrison was right about the quantum masking technology, she said into her secure phone. We're going to need everything we've built over the past 15 years. Contact all the hidden bases. Tell them this is not a drill. Around the world, in secret locations that did not appear on any map, groups of humans began to prepare for something they had hoped would never happen. Under the ocean, inside mountains, and in space stations that were invisible to normal telescopes, humanity's real defenses began to wake up. Most people on Earth continued their normal lives. They went to work, watched television, and complained about traffic. They had no idea that their planet was being watched by aliens who thought humans were primitive and weak. The aliens were about to learn that appearances can be very deceiving. In his command ship, Zektar gave the order to begin moving toward Earth. 300 massive warships started their engines and began the journey to what they thought would be an easy conquest. None of them noticed the small changes in space around them as they flew. Tiny sensors that looked like pieces of metal junk began tracking their movement. Signals that seemed like natural cosmic radiation started carrying information back to hidden bases. Humanity had been preparing for this day for 15 years. The aliens thought they were hunting primitive prey. They were about to discover that they had walked into the most sophisticated trap ever built. The Vorthan fleet moved through space like a school of metal fish. Each ship was huge, bigger than the largest buildings on Earth. Their dark hulls were covered with weapons that could destroy entire cities with single shots. 300 of these monsters were now heading straight for Earth. Commander Zektar felt confident as he watched his fleet travel toward the small blue planet. He had done this many times before. The pattern was always the same. Show up with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and watch the local people give up without a fight. How long until we reach the target world? He asked his navigation officer. 6 more days at current speed, Commander, came the reply. Should we begin preparing the surrender broadcast? Zektar nodded. The surrender broadcast was a message they would send to Earth explaining that resistance was useless. It usually worked. Most species were smart enough to know when they were beaten. What Zektar could not see was that his fleet was flying into the most complex trap ever created by any species in the galaxy. Hidden throughout the solar system were machines that looked like ordinary space junk. Old satellites that seemed to be broken. Pieces of metal that appeared to be left over from early space missions. Rocks that looked completely natural. None of these things were what they seemed. Dr. Jake Morrison sat in the control room of Phoenix Base, watching the alien fleet approach on screens that showed things no normal telescope could see. The base itself was hidden inside what looked like a large asteroid. From the outside, it appeared to be just another chunk of rock floating in space. Inside, it was humanity's most advanced facility. Scientists and engineers who were supposed to be dead worked on projects that officially did not exist. They had spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment. Quantum Shroud is working perfectly, Dr. Lisa Park reported from her station. The aliens are seeing exactly what we want them to see. The Quantum Shroud was humanity's greatest achievement. It was a field that could bend light and energy to make things appear different than they really were. To the Vorthans, Earth looked like a primitive world with basic technology. They could not see the real truth. What are they seeing when they scan us? Admiral Sullivan asked. She had flown up to Phoenix Base to personally oversee the operation. A planet with simple nuclear power, basic rockets, and radio communications that leak into space, Jake answered. Exactly what a young civilization would have. They have no idea what we're really capable of. The real Earth was hidden behind layers of technology that the aliens could not even imagine. What looked like a primitive world was actually the center of an advanced civilization that had been preparing for war among the stars. On the surface of Earth, most people continued their daily lives without knowing anything was wrong. The governments of the world had agreed to keep the alien threat secret to prevent panic. Only a few hundred people knew the truth, but under the ocean, on the hidden side of the moon, and in secret bases throughout the solar system, humanity's real strength was getting ready. Mars looked empty and dead to the Vorthans. They could not see the underground cities where millions of humans lived and worked. Venus appeared to be just a hot planet with thick clouds. The aliens did not know about the floating research stations that hid in those clouds, even Earth's. Moon seemed normal to them. They saw some old landing sites from the 1960s and 1970s, but nothing recent or important. They could not see the massive installations that covered the far side of the moon, or the weapons that were built deep inside. Fleet composition analysis complete, reported Colonel Ryan Torres. 300 ships, standard Vorthan attack. Formation. They're not even trying to hide their approach. Why would they? Admiral Sullivan replied. They think we're primitives who can't detect them until they're right on top of us. The Vorthans had made this mistake many times before, but it had never cost them because all their previous enemies really had been primitive. Earth was different. Earth had been watching and learning. How did we know they were coming? Jake asked. It was a question that had been bothering him. Lisa smiled. Remember the quantum echoes we detected from destroyed civilizations? We weren't just studying those for science. We were learning the Vorthan attack patterns. Every world they conquered left traces in quantum space. We studied those traces and figured out exactly how they operate. The truth was that humanity had not just prepared defenses. They had studied their enemy for decades. They knew Vorthan tactics, Vorthan technology, and most importantly, Vorthan weaknesses. All stations report ready, came a voice over the communication system. Phase 1 is complete. Beginning Phase 2 preparations. Around the solar system, machines that had been sleeping for years began to wake up. Power systems that had been running on minimum settings started building up energy. Weapons that looked like asteroids began charging their systems. The Vorthan fleet continued toward Earth, completely unaware that they were flying into a trap that had been planned for 15 years. Their sensors showed empty space ahead of them. Their computers calculated an easy victory. Commander Zektar looked at the image of Earth growing larger on his screen. Begin final approach preparations, he ordered. Standard intimidation formation. I want those primitives to see our power and surrender immediately. His officers began arranging the fleet into a pattern designed to terrify any planet's population. 300 massive warships would position themselves around Earth, like a metal cage. No one had ever resisted when faced with such overwhelming force. Should we scan for any hidden defenses, Commander? Sub-Commander Veloff asked. Zektar made his laughing sound again. What defenses could they possibly have that are initial? Scans missed? These creatures can barely reach their own moon. Save the deep scans for when we actually encounter resistance. It was exactly the kind of thinking that humanity had been counting on. The Vorthans were so confident in their superiority that they would not look closely until it was too late. In Phoenix Base, alarms began to sound softly. They're entering the outer detection zone, Jake announced. All systems show green. The trap is ready. Admiral Sullivan took a deep breath. 15 years of preparation were about to be tested. Begin Phase 2, she ordered. Let's show these aliens what happens when you underestimate humanity. The Vorthan fleet moved closer to Earth, confident and ready to add another world to their empire. Commander Zektar watched his screens as the blue planet grew larger. Everything looked exactly as his scouts had reported. A primitive world with no real defenses. Begin final approach, Zektar ordered. Standard formation. I want every human on that planet to see our ships when they look up at their sky. The 300 warships spread out into their intimidation pattern. Each ship was the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that could level mountains. They had used this same formation on 47 other worlds. It always worked, but as the fleet moved into position around Earth, something strange began to happen. "Commander," the navigation officer called out, confusion clear in his voice. "We're encountering some kind of resistance. Our speed is dropping, but the engines are working normally." Zektar frowned. "Resistance? From what?" "These primitives don't have any defenses we didn't already detect." The truth was that the Vorthans had flown straight into humanity's most sophisticated weapon. It wasn't a gun or a missile. It was space itself. Hidden throughout the solar system, machines that looked like ordinary asteroids and space junk began to work together. They created invisible fields that changed how space and time worked in the area around Earth. The Vorthans were not being stopped by weapons. They were being trapped by the universe itself. In Phoenix Base, Dr. Jake Morrison watched the readings with satisfaction. "Space-time distortion field is working perfectly," he reported. "They're caught in a bubble where time moves differently for them than it does for us." Dr. Lisa Park monitored the alien fleet's attempts to escape. From their point of view, they're moving at normal speed, but in real time, they're barely moving at all. They're like flies stuck in honey. The technology behind the trap was based on discoveries that humanity had made while studying the remains of civilizations the Vorthans had destroyed. Those dead worlds had left quantum echoes in space, and human scientists had learned to read. Those echoes like books. Admiral Sullivan watched the struggling fleet on her screens. "How long can we maintain the field?" "As long as we need to," Jake answered. "The beautiful part is that we're using their own engines to power the trap. The harder they try to escape, the stronger the field becomes." Sub-Commander Veloth stared at his instruments in growing panic. "Sir, our engines are at maximum power, but we're not moving forward. If anything, we seem to be moving backward." Commander Zektar had lived for over 300 years and had never encountered anything like this. "All ships, report status." He barked into his communication system. The reports that came back were all the same. Every ship in the fleet was experiencing the same problem. They could see Earth right in front of them, but they could not reach it. Their most powerful engines, capable of crossing between stars, could not cover the last few thousand miles. "This is impossible," Zektar muttered. "No primitive species should have technology like this." The Vorthan commander was beginning to realize that his intelligence about Earth might have been wrong. Very wrong. On Earth, most humans continued their normal lives, unaware that 300 alien warships were struggling helplessly just outside their planet's atmosphere. The secret was being kept by a small group of people who had spent their lives preparing for this moment. "Sir," Colonel Ryan Torres reported to Admiral Sullivan, "we're intercepting their communications. They're starting to panic. Some of their officers are suggesting that Earth might not be as primitive as they thought." "Let them panic," the Admiral replied coldly. "They came here to conquer and enslave us. Now they can learn what it feels like to be helpless." The quantum field around Earth was more than just a trap. It was also a shield. Any observer from outside the solar system would see nothing unusual. The Vorthan fleet had simply vanished, without a trace. No energy signatures, no explosions, no signs of battle. Just gone. Dr. Jake Morrison made adjustments to the field generators. "I'm detecting increased power output from their engines. They're trying to break free by using more force. Redirect that extra energy to our Phase 3 systems," Admiral Sullivan ordered. "Since they're being so generous with their power, we might as well use it." Around the solar system, weapon systems that had been hidden for 15 years began to charge up using energy stolen from the trapped alien fleet. The Vorthans were not just caught in a trap. They were powering their own doom. "Commander," Veloth said quietly, "I think we should consider that these humans might not be the primitives we thought they were." Zektar's scales had turned a pale color that showed fear in his species. "Contact the Empire. Tell them we need reinforcements." But when they tried to send messages back to their home worlds, the communications were blocked. The same field that trapped their ships also cut off their contact with the outside universe. They were completely alone. "Sir, we're detecting energy signatures throughout this solar system," the sensor officer reported. "Things that were hidden before are starting to become visible." Zektar looked at the new readings and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: pure terror. What had appeared to be an empty solar system was suddenly full of artificial structures. Massive installations on planets, space stations hidden in asteroid fields, and weapons platforms that had been disguised as space junk. "How long have they been watching us?" he whispered. The answer was longer than he could have imagined. Humanity had been tracking Vorthan expansion for decades. They had studied every conquest, learned from every victory, and prepared for this exact moment. In Phoenix Base, alarms began sounding. "Phase 3 systems are fully charged," Jake announced. "We are ready to begin the Revelation Protocol." Admiral Sullivan looked at the trapped fleet on her screens. 300 ships that had come to conquer Earth were now helpless prisoners. Their crews were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. "Begin Phase 3, she ordered. "Let's show them what they're really dealing with." Across the solar system, humanity's true civilization began to reveal itself. Mars suddenly showed signs of massive underground cities. The moon's hidden installations became visible. Venus revealed floating research stations in its clouds. Even Earth itself looked different. What the Vorthans had seen as a primitive world with basic technology now showed energy signatures that rivaled their own empire. "Commander," Zektar stared at his screens in disbelief. "What are they?" he asked, but no one on his ship had an answer. Humans were about to show him exactly what they were, and why underestimating Earth had been the last mistake his fleet would ever make. The stars themselves began to change around the trapped Vorthan fleet. What had looked like empty space now showed signs of massive construction projects that stretched across the entire solar system. Commander Zektar watched in growing horror as his understanding of reality crumbled around him. "This is impossible," Sub-Commander Veloth whispered, his 4 eyes wide with terror. "No species develops this fast. Our scouts surveyed this system only months ago." The truth was that humanity had not developed this technology quickly. They had been building it in secret for decades, hidden behind quantum fields that made everything invisible to normal sensors. What the Vorthans were seeing now was the real Earth civilization, the one that had been preparing for their arrival since before they had even decided to come. Dr. Jake Morrison worked at his controls in Phoenix Base, watching the alien reactions with satisfaction. "Revelation Protocol is working perfectly," he reported. "They're seeing our civilization as it really is for the first time." Mars, which had appeared dead and empty, suddenly came alive with energy signatures. The red planet's surface opened in hundreds of places, revealing elevator shafts that went deep underground. Massive cities that housed millions of humans became visible beneath the Martian soil. The moon, Earth's closest neighbor, showed even more dramatic changes. The far side, which the Vorthans had dismissed as uninteresting, was covered with installations that stretched from pole to pole. Massive weapons arrays pointed outward toward space, ready to defend the inner solar system. Even Venus, hidden behind its thick clouds and crushing atmosphere, revealed floating cities that rode the high altitude. Weens, research stations that had been working on advanced technology for decades, suddenly appeared on Vorthan sensors. "How many humans are there?" Zektar asked, his voice shaking. The answer was far more than he had imagined. What he had thought was a single world with a few billion primitive inhabitants was actually a multi-planet civilization with advanced technology and careful planning. Admiral Sullivan decided it was time to make contact. She opened a communication channel to the trapped fleet, her image appearing on screens throughout the Vorthan ships. When she spoke, it was in perfect Vorthan language, which shocked the aliens even more. "Greetings, Commander Zektar of the Vorthan Empire," she said calmly. "I am Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Earth Defense Force. You seem surprised to discover that we know who you are." Zektar stared at the human woman on his screen. She looked small and fragile compared to his own species, but her eyes held a confidence that terrified him. "How do you know our language? How do you know my name?" "We have been studying your empire for 50 of your years," Admiral Sullivan replied. "We know your tactics, your technology, your history, and your weaknesses. We know about every world you have conquered and every species you have destroyed." The revelation hit the Vorthan commander like a physical blow. Impossible. We would have detected such surveillance. Dr. Lisa Park smiled as she monitored the conversation from her station. The aliens still did not understand how completely they had been outmaneuvered. "They never learned to look beyond their own technology," she said to Jake. "They assumed that if they couldn't detect something, it didn't exist." Admiral Sullivan continued her explanation to the trapped fleet. "Your empire has been expanding for centuries, crushing civilizations that could not defend themselves. You became careless because you never encountered real resistance. That carelessness has led you into the most sophisticated trap ever created." The truth was even more disturbing than Zektar could imagine. Humanity had not just been watching the Vorthan Empire. They had been learning from every species the Vorthans had conquered. Each world you destroyed left quantum echoes in space. The Admiral explained. "Our scientists learned to read those echoes like historical records. We studied the last thoughts and final technologies of 47 different civilizations. We learned from their mistakes and incorporated their best ideas into our defenses." Colonel Ryan Torres added technical details that made the Vorthan situation even more hopeless. "Your quantum drives, which you consider advanced, actually operate on principles we mastered decades ago. The energy signatures you produce are as easy for us to track as footprints in sand. Around the solar system, more and more of humanity's true infrastructure became visible. Asteroid mining operations that had been disguised as natural formations. Massive particle accelerators built into the rings of Jupiter. Research stations that had been hidden in the gas giant atmospheres, studying physics that the Vorthans had never imagined. "What do you want from us?" Zektar finally asked. In his centuries of conquest, he had never been in a position of weakness. The experience was terrifying and humbling. "Information," Admiral Sullivan replied simply. "Complete data on your empire's military capabilities, territorial extent, and expansion plans. In exchange, we offer you something your empire has never provided to others." "What?" Veloth demanded. "A choice," the Admiral said. "You can join us as partners in mutual defense, or you can be released to return to your empire with a message." The offer stunned the Vorthan officers. In their entire history, they had only given other species two options: surrender or die. The concept of partnership was completely foreign to them. Dr. Jake Morrison added another element that made the situation even more complex. "Our long-range sensors, which are more advanced than anything your empire possesses, have detected other threats in this galaxy. There are at least 3 other empire-level civilizations moving in this direction. Your expansion may have attracted their attention." New data appeared on the Vorthan screens, showing sensor readings that their own technology could never have produced. The readings showed massive fleets moving through distant parts of the galaxy, civilizations that made the Vorthan Empire look small and weak. These other empires are older and more dangerous than yours, Colonel Torres explained. They consider younger civilizations like the Vorthans to be threats that need to be eliminated. Your conquests have made this entire spiral arm of the galaxy visible to predators that you never knew existed. Commander Zektar processed this information with growing horror. His empire had always assumed they were the apex predators of the galaxy. The possibility that they might be prey had never occurred to any Vorthan leader. If we agree to this alliance, he said slowly, what guarantees do we have that you won't simply conquer us yourselves? Admiral Sullivan's expression softened slightly. The same guarantee we give every species that chooses cooperation over conquest. Look around this solar system, Commander. Do you see any conquered populations? Any slave worlds? Any destroyed civilizations? The Vorthan commander realized she was right. Despite having technology that clearly surpassed his own empire's capabilities, humanity had not used it for conquest. They had used it for defense and preparation. Every species in our alliance joined voluntarily, the Admiral continued. They remain independent while contributing to mutual defense. We share technology and knowledge freely. It is a system your empire has never tried because you were too focused on domination. Dr. Lisa Park made a final adjustment to the quantum field holding the fleet. I'm opening a small communication window, she announced. Let them contact their empire. Let them explain how 300 ships vanished without firing a shot. As the communication systems came back online, Commander Ziktar faced the most difficult decision of his long life. He could try to warn his empire about humanity's true capabilities, or he could consider the possibility that everything his civilization believed about strength and conquest might be wrong. The message he sent back to the Vorthan homeworld would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Commander Zektar stared at the communication console in his command center. For the first time in his 300 years of life, he had to admit that his empire had been completely outmatched. The humans had not just defeated his fleet. They had made it look easy. The quantum field that held his ships was still active, but Admiral Sullivan had allowed limited communications with the Vorthan homeworld. Zektar knew that whatever message he sent would determine the fate of both civilizations. Commander, Subcommander Veloth said quietly, what do we tell the High Command? It was a question that had no easy answer. How do you explain to a conquest-based empire that you found a species that could have destroyed you, but chose not to? How do you tell military leaders who had never failed that failure had just become a real possibility? Admiral Sullivan's voice came through the communication system again. Commander, while you consider your options, perhaps you would like to see the full extent of what you missed during your initial survey. New images appeared on the Vorthan screens. What they saw changed. Everything they thought they knew about human civilization. Earth itself was far more advanced than they had imagined. The cities on the surface were just the visible part of a much larger civilization. Beneath the oceans were massive underwater cities connected by transport tunnels that spanned entire continents. The planet's core had been converted into a massive energy generation system that powered technologies the Vorthans could barely understand. We have been preparing for contact with hostile aliens for 75 of your years, Dr. Jake Morrison explained from Phoenix Base. Every aspect of our civilization has been designed with defense in mind. The moon showed even more impressive modifications. The entire satellite had been converted into a fortress factory that could produce warships faster than the Vorthans could build them. The far side contained massive rail guns that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Mars revealed underground cities that housed over 50 million humans. The Red Planet had become humanity's primary research and development center, where new technologies were tested away from Earth's population. Some of the experiments taking place, there involved physics that Vorthan science considered impossible. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "Admiral," Colonel Ryan Torres announced, "the other Alliance members are requesting permission to decloak." Admiral Sullivan nodded. "Granted. I think our Vorthan guests need to understand the full situation." Throughout the solar system, ships began appearing that had been invisible moments before. But these were not human ships. They belonged to other species, other civilizations that had faced the same choice the Vorthans were now being offered. The tall ships with the crystal hulls belonged to the Kethran, Admiral Sullivan explained. The Vorthan Empire targeted their homeworld 8 years ago. We offered them protection and partnership instead of conquest. More ships became visible. Sleek vessels with organic curves that seemed to be grown rather than built. Massive geometric structures that looked more like art than weapons. Ships that seemed to be made of pure energy held in magnetic fields. 12 different species have joined our alliance, Dr. Lisa Park added. Each one was once targeted by empires like yours. Each one chose cooperation over domination. Commander Zip Tar counted the ships around his trapped fleet. There were thousands of them, representing technologies from across the galaxy. The Earth Defense Alliance was not just one species preparing for war. It was a coalition of civilizations that had moved beyond the need for conquest. "This is impossible," Veloth whispered. "How did you contact all these species? How did you convince them to work together?" "The same way we're trying to convince you," Admiral Sullivan replied. "We offered them something better than endless war. We offered them security, shared knowledge, and the chance to grow beyond what any single species could achieve alone." The concept was revolutionary for the Vorthans. Their entire civilization was based on the idea that strength came from conquest and domination. The possibility that cooperation might actually be more powerful had never occurred to them. "Your empire has conquered 47 worlds," Colonel Torres pointed out. "But you're still using essentially the same technology had when you started. You take resources and slaves, but you don't learn or grow." "In contrast," Dr. Jake Morrison added, "our alliance has existed for only 15 years, but our technological advancement has been exponential. When species share knowledge freely instead of hoarding it, everyone benefits." The proof was all around them. The Vorthan fleet, representing the peak of their empire's technology, was completely helpless against defenses that had been built through cooperative effort. "What happens now?" Zektar asked. Admiral Sullivan's expression became serious. "That depends on what you tell your empire. You have 3 choices. First, you can lie to them and pretend this never happened. Eventually, they'll send more fleets to investigate, and we'll be forced to defend ourselves more aggressively." The commander understood the implication. If the Vorthan Empire continued to be aggressive, humanity and their allies would not remain passive forever. "Second," the admiral continued, "you can tell them the truth and recommend an alliance. Your empire gains access to technologies that could solve your resource problems without the need for conquest." "And the third option?" Veloth asked. "You can tell them the complete truth about the other threats we've detected." Admiral Sullivan sighed grimly. "Show them the sensor data about the older civilizations that are moving in this direction. Help them understand that all of our species need to work together if we want to survive what's coming." New data appeared on the Vorthan screens, showing long-range sensor readings that their own technology could never have produced. Massive fleets were moving through distant parts of the galaxy, civilizations that had been expanding for thousands of years. These older empires view younger civilizations as threats to be eliminated, Dr. Lisa Park explained. They don't conquer worlds. They sterilize entire star systems. Your expansion has made this spiral arm visible to them. Commander Zeke-Tar studied the data with growing fear. His empire had been so focused on conquering primitive worlds that they had never considered the possibility of encountering something more advanced than themselves. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Based on their current speed and direction, perhaps 50 years before they reach this region of space," Admiral Sullivan replied. "Enough time to prepare if we work together. Not nearly enough if we continue fighting each other." The Vorthan commander made his decision. He opened a communication channel to his homeworld and began composing the most important message in his empire's history. "Vorthan High Command," he began, his voice steady despite his fear. "This is Commander Zeke-Tar reporting a critical change in strategic situation. The species we came to conquer has proven to be far more advanced than our intelligence indicated. We are not dealing with primitives. We are dealing with the center of an advanced galactic alliance." He paused, knowing that his next words would change everything. "I recommend immediate diplomatic contact and alliance negotiation. We are no longer the apex predators of this galaxy. It is time to learn cooperation before we encounter something that views us as the primitives." As his message traveled back to the Vorthan homeworld, Commander Zeke-Tar looked out at the massive fleet of alliance ships surrounding his own vessels. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of cooperation was about to begin.